Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in today's video I'm going to be taking an in-depth look at Guardian Druids in Shadowlands Season 1, looking at things like when to use certain talents and legendaries, the strength of different covenants, soulbinds, and conduits, as well as some general tips for tanking Mythic Plus as a bear. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe to be notified when I post more Warcraft content, and let's start by talking a little bit about Guardian Druids, how they work, how they play, and what they bring to the table in a 5-man group. Guardians are often considered one of the most straightforward tanks, as their main source of mitigation, Iron Fur, is simple and quite easy to use. It has no cooldown, only costing some rage, and grants you armor based on your agility. It can also be stacked, though additional uses don't refresh the duration of already active Iron Furs, allowing you to partially overlap applications of the buff. Since this provides armor, it is your main source of physical damage mitigation, which is very important in Mythic Plus, as a large portion of the damage in every dungeon is made up of melee attacks, meaning you'll want to be spending the vast majority of your rage on this ability. Outside of Iron Fur, bears can also spend rage on Frenzied Regen, a powerful self-heal with 2 charges, and Maul, a single target burst of damage. For the most part, you won't actually want to spend rage on Maul, as it's not very efficient and doesn't deal a ton of damage. This means you're much better off spending rage on skills like Iron Fur or Frenzied Regen instead. When it comes to mitigating magic damage or larger physical hits, bears have a couple cooldowns to work with. Bark Skin is their smaller, shorter cooldown option, granting a 20% DR on a 1-minute cooldown baseline, whereas Survival Instincts is for mitigating more powerful attacks, granting a 50% DR on a 3-minute cooldown that has 2 charges. On top of these strong mitigation tools, bears also bring a lot of utility to 5-man groups, with things like Remove Corruption to dispel curses and poisons, Soothe to remove enrage effects, Stampeding Roar to help with group mobility, a Battle Res in Rebirth, an AoE Disorient from Incapacitating Roar, as well as a plethora of other CCs including Root, Cyclone, and some other talent options. Overall, bears are extremely durable and bring a ton of utility to your group, and I personally think they are a fantastic choice for Season 1. Now, before getting too far into this guide, I did want to take a minute to define terms like low-level, mid-level, and high-level keys, which get thrown around a lot. You may not agree with the exact definition I'm putting forth, but it's just for reference, as I will be using these terms throughout the video and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. To start off, low-level keys are anything from a +2 to a +11, which are keys many players will get to do, where dungeons are much more forgiving when it comes to missing kicks or ignoring skips. Moving up, mid-level keys are anything from a +12 to a +17, where pre-planning and strategy become much more important as mob abilities and boss abilities become significantly more punishing. Lastly, we have high-level keys, which include anything 18 and above, which are extremely difficult and requires all 5 players to communicate well and be on top of their game. With key levels defined, I now want to take a look at some of the legendary effects available to Guardian Druids, and where they fit based on what key levels you plan to run. There are 2 main frontrunners when it comes to powers, with a few situational choices. If you want a mix of offense and defense, Ursoc's Fury Remembered is a powerful option, granting Thrash a 15% chance to trigger an additional Thrash, and causing it to grant an Absorb Shield equal to 75% of the damage dealt. Over the course of a Mythic Plus dungeon, 15% more Thrashes does add up, dealing an okay amount of overall damage, and the Absorb Shield lets bears do an insane amount of healing, becoming nearly unkillable during their Berserk windows when they're able to just spam Thrash. I'd recommend this legendary for people looking to do mid-level keys, especially if you're pugging a lot, since it makes you feel a lot safer and less healer reliant, while also having a little offensive upside. When it comes to pushing high keys, the best pure defensive option is the Natural Order's Will, which increases the DR on Barkskin by 10% and causes it to grant you 1 stack of Iron Fur and a Frenzied Regeneration when it begins and ends. The biggest benefit of this legendary is actually not the extra DR, but rather the additional Frenzied Regens, providing Guardians with some insane healing throughput when taking heavy sustained damage, which happens quite frequently in higher keys, as well as on fortified weeks and mid-level keys. The downside of this legendary, of course, is the lack of any personal offensive upside compared to other options. However, when it comes to pushing higher keys, the best thing a tank can do in most situations is to make the choice to keep themselves alive longer, making this legendary an extremely strong choice if you're looking to do 18 keys and beyond. From there, we have some honorable mention legendaries, starting with Lufa Infused Embrace, which boosts your Thrash damage by 20%, increases its radius by 30%, and allows it to stack 1 additional time. This legendary is almost entirely offensive, providing little defensive benefit, making it good for lower level keys or for mid-level keys once you overgear them, just to help you blast through your weekly keystones a little quicker. In terms of pushing higher level content, I definitely wouldn't recommend this legendary, since as you begin to push into higher keys, you really feel the lack of defensive benefit it gives compared to some of the other options. Legacy of the Sleeper turns your Berserk into the old Legion Guardian ability, causing it to also grant 25% damage, 15% leech, CC immunity, and have its cooldown reduced by 30 seconds. This legendary fills a similar role as Ursoc's Fury Remembered, with the caveat that UFR gives additional benefit outside of your Berserk window, whereas this legendary does not. While Legacy of the Sleeper will likely give you better overall damage if you plan your pulls around your Berserk or Incarns, the fact that this legendary is reliant on a 2.5 minute cooldown for value makes it feel a little lacking by comparison. Lastly, Lycara's Fleeting Glimpse is quite interesting if a bit difficult to use, granting you additional bark skins if in bear form, or if you're able to kite away and pop into boomkin form before the timer goes off, you can get some starfalls for extra damage. Currently, I don't think this legendary is going to get much use, at least in Season 1, but it could be an interesting option if players eventually are able to use two legendaries thanks to the synergy it has with the Natural Order's Will, allowing you to get more bark skins, and therefore more frenzied regens and iron furs, which could be a nice combo. When it comes to stats for these legendaries, you'll pretty much always want to put haste and versatility on them, which provide a good mix of offense and defense. For general gearing purposes though, don't get stuck in the trap of picking lower item level pieces that have these stats on them, as eye level will always be king for bears because of how strong stats like agility, armor, and stamina are for their survivability. When it comes to damage, you can always sim for the best results, but if that's not what you're worried about, there is an extremely high chance that the higher item level piece is just better. When looking at what slots to put your legendary in, it will likely be best for you to craft the legendary in the slot that has the highest stat budget, with pieces like helms, chest, and legs having the highest, and shoulders, feet, hands, and waist being in the middle. This is because your legendary piece at rank 4 will be your highest equipped item, so having it be a highly budgeted piece gives you a nice little stat boost. With the legendary section done, let's look at Guardian Druid talents and in what situations different choices work best. Starting with the level 15 row, there isn't too much to discuss here as your choices are pretty cut and dry. Bristling Fur isn't too great for dungeon content as it's used to take advantage of bursts of damage for rage generation, but in Mythic Plus you're pretty much constantly taking high amounts of damage from multiple targets, making the consistency of talent like Blood Frenzy significantly more valuable. This makes Blood Frenzy the default talent on this row, as in Mythic Plus with the high number of targets it really smooths out Guardian's rage generation, helping you to not feel rage starved and allowing you to pump out more iron furs and frenzied regens. Brambles is an alright pick on this row that gives you a little extra self-healing and damage, and works great in similar situations as the Lufa legendary in lower level keys and overgeared mid level keys to squeak out a bit more damage, but in general playing with Blood Frenzy just feels a lot better. Then we've got the level 25 row, which similarly has one very strong choice that beats the others out in Renewal, which is a self-heal for 30% of your HP on a 1.5 minute cooldown, which doesn't seem terribly powerful, but since it's competing with two mobility options, it becomes the clear choice. Tiger Dash can be dangerous to use in keys as it puts you in cat form, which can result in instant death if you haven't created enough space between yourself and the mobs, and Wild Charge gives Guardian a nice quality of life improvement that works fine for low level and even mid level keys, but it just can't compete with Renewal actually giving you throughput and a nice little panic button, which is extremely useful for both mid and high level keys. From there we have the level 30 Affinity row, which gives you a bit of a choice based on personal preference, opting for a little bit of self-healing and Ursul's Vortex from Restoration Affinity, or a slightly bigger range and Typhoon for Balance Affinity. These two talents are quite well balanced, each providing solid benefits that are strong in different situations, and so you are free to choose what you prefer and change it up on a dungeon to dungeon basis. For example, Typhoon is significantly better on Sanguine weeks when you need the knockback, but something like Ursul's Vortex can be a lot stronger against Spiteful in a group full of ranged DPS, or against any trash mobs that try and jump away from your group. At the end of the day, these talents are both good regardless of key level, so it'll depend on your own personal preference, the dungeon you're running, and the affixes that week. I will note that Balance Affinity has a powerful synergy for those of you part of the Night Fate Covenant, as Convoking while in Boomkin form can deal quite a bit of damage, though keep in mind you'll most likely want to create some space between yourself and the pack before attempting this. Next up is the level 35 row, which offers Heart of the Wild with a couple CC talents in Mighty Bash and Mass Entanglement's AoE route. Heart of the Wild has exactly one use on this row, only being useful when synergizing with Balance Affinity on the previous row and Convoke from the Night Fate Covenant as previously mentioned. Convoke and Balance Affinity alone allows for a decent damage boost, but when you add in Heart of the Wild to the mix, you can get some pretty crazy burst numbers on both bosses and big pulls. I wouldn't recommend this for beginner players as it can be a bit difficult to execute, however I did want to make you all aware of this powerful combination. If that's not something you're interested in and you aren't Night Fae, Mighty Bash will be your choice most of the time here, as having a single target stun is great for stopping otherwise uninterruptible spells, or just as a pseudo-interrupt itself, but there are some situations, namely in Plaguefall, where Mass Entanglement becomes a very enticing option. When it comes to Plaguefall, there are a ton of things you can do with Mass Entangle, which can be very useful depending on your group composition, like rooting slimes on Globgrog or Dr. Ickis, as well as the devoted ads on Margrave Stradama, allowing you to ignore them and pump more damage into the bosses. Moving on, we have the level 40 row, where we start to see some more impactful talent decisions. While this row does have one poor option in Soul of the Forest, which only provides a single target damage boost, the choice between Galactic Guardian and Incarnation can be an interesting one. Galactic Guardian provides consistent damage and rage generation over the course of a dungeon, whereas Incarnation doubles the duration of Berserk, giving you 30 seconds of extreme durability, or 30 seconds of being virtually unkillable when paired with Ursoc's Fury Remembered Legendary. When it comes to overall value, I tend to lean towards Galactic Guardian, even when using UFR, as consistency is extremely important for tanks, especially when it comes to rage generation. Incarnation can be exceptionally strong when used correctly though, and is best when doing pre-planned large pulls on 3-minute intervals, which lets you get a ton of value from the talent. If we end up seeing any Guardians at the MDI, I wouldn't be surprised if Incarnation is their go-to talent choice, but for those of you not doing insane pulls, I'd go with Galactic Guardian. The level 45 row also has an interesting choice of defensive options between Earth Warden and Survival of the Fittest, where the former gives you great damage reduction against melee attacks, which tend to make up a large portion of the damage intake in Mythic Plus dungeons, and the latter decreases the cooldown of your DR abilities, making it much more preferred if you're taking a lot of damage from specific abilities or magic damage. Survival of the Fittest also has strong synergy with the Natural Order's Will, allowing you to get Bar Skin down to a 40-second cooldown, which lets you fit in a lot more over the course of a dungeon. Unfortunately, when it comes to defensive ability, Guardian of Elune just can't compete with these two choices in dungeons, so you won't ever pick it. In general, I'd recommend Earth Warden to players that plan to do low and mid-level keys, but as the key levels get higher and you begin to worry more about mitigating ability damage and less about melee attacks since you're forced to kite more, the synergy of Survival of the Fittest has what now becomes hard to ignore. There are still a few outlier dungeons where you'd want to take Earth Warden despite also using Now, namely Mists of Tyrannus Scythe, where something like 80% of your damage intake is coming from melee attacks, but for the most part, if you're at the key level where you want to use Now, it's safe to say using Survival of the Fittest is a good option. That leaves us with the final level 50 talent row, where we're back to not having any choice at all, since one talent is vastly superior to the rest in Mythic Plus content, with Rend and Tear beating out both Pulverize and Tooth and Claw. This talent just gives you a free 6% damage increase and damage reduction after you're able to get 3 Thrashes off, or 8% when using the Lufa legendary, and it's the only talent on this row that gives you a consistent defensive and offensive boost in AoE. By comparison, Pulverize is a 10-second single target boost on a 45-second cooldown, and Tooth and Claw is proc-based, gives a single target damage and defensive boost, and requires you to dump Rage into Maul, which is something you almost never want to do in Mythic Plus content. That leaves you with pretty much one choice in Rend and Tear, which you'll run in every scenario. Now that we've talked about talents, let's look at Covenant choice. Guardians are actually in a very good spot right now when it comes to Covenant balance, meaning you're actually able to pick the one you like the best. You will see a lot of players gravitating towards Night Fae since they are by far the best choice for people interested in playing multiple specs, and for high keys the extra healing from Caster Convokes and damage from Boomkin Convokes can be quite powerful, on top of Soul Shape being a great tool for kiting. Despite this though, if you look at the top Guardian Druids in dungeons, you'll see a decent mix of all 4 Covenants, so feel free to go with the Covenant you prefer, as they're all quite close. For example, Venthyr Druids gain Endless Thirst, another 3-minute cooldown they can pair with Berserker Incarn to further increase their throughput during those windows, allowing for some insane pulls. Kyrian Druids have access to Phial of Serenity to cleanse some scary debuffs including Necrotic, and their Kindred Spirits can be a decent damage boost when attached to the right DPSer. Finally, Necrolords give bears a much needed boost to their single target damage and lets them do some insane healing with Frenzied Regen when they are self-buffed by Adaptive Swarm. Personally, I made the choice based on the Covenants in my 5-man group, opting to go Necrolord since we were lacking one and wanted to make sure all the dungeon buffs are covered, but again, all 4 are viable for Mythic Plus, so don't feel forced to pick one you don't like. Since all 4 Covenants are viable, for the sake of brevity, I'll only go over the top Guardian Soulbind for each Covenant rather than all 3. Before talking Soulbinds though, let's first look at the Conduits that get socketed into them. For Finesse Conduits, none of the options are terrible, but none are standouts either, making it a matter of personal preference. Born Anew causes your Battle Res to apply a food buff to the target, which is a small throughput boost to your group if you're the Battle Reser, which can be nice. Born of the Wilds gives you some cooldown reduction on your level 35 row talents, which can allow you to pump out some more stuns over the course of the dungeon when used alongside Mighty Bash. Front of the Pack offers your group a longer stampeding roar that will more consistently hit your entire group, making it decent for getting out of a bad situation or for just kiting enemies. Lastly, there's Tireless Pursuit, causing you to maintain some of your travel or cat form move speed once leaving the form, which helps a bit when it comes to kiting. As I mentioned, none of these are super impactful, and some of the Soulbinds don't even involve you taking a finesse conduit, so you're welcome to take what you prefer. Personally, I like Front of the Pack, but all of them could be justified. Then we've got Endurance Conduits, where bears have several very good options and a couple okay ones. There are two must-have conduits here, starting with Layered Mane, which is reminiscent of the old Azurite trait, causing your Iron Furs to have a chance to apply 2 stacks instead of 1. This gives a nice durability increase over the course of a dungeon, and makes rage spent on Iron Fur much more efficient. It can also lead to some insane Iron Fur stack numbers, especially during Berserk, and makes this conduit good on all key levels. The other very powerful endurance conduit bears have is Well-Honed Instincts, which causes you to gain Frenzied Regen when you fall below 40% health on an approximately 60-second cooldown. This gives you healing exactly when you need it most, and provides a significant boost to the number of Frenzied Regens you get over the course of a dungeon if you can proc it reliably, meaning it gets stronger as you push into higher keys, and can lose value in lower keys when your health is less spiky. Another strong endurance option is Innate Resolve, which just provides a flat boost to your Frenzied Regen healing and has a great synergy with not only the previously mentioned Well-Honed Instincts conduit, but also with Natural Order's Will, which also increases the number of Frenzied Regens you get overall. Regardless of if you're using these synergies though, a flat self-healing increase is always a solid option. Tough as Bark can also be a good option, decreasing the cooldown of Barkskin by about 15%. However, something to keep in mind is that when this trait is used alongside Survival of the Fittest, it only ends up being a 6-second cooldown reduction on Barkskin, which leads to anywhere from 5 to 10 more Barkskins cast per dungeon if you're using it on cooldown. This is still decent, but makes this another personal preference decision between it and Innate Resolve if you have access to a third endurance slot in your Soulbind. There is one more endurance conduit in Ursine Vigor, which gives you 18% more health and armor for 4 seconds after shifting into bear form, but unfortunately this trait is a little hard to use due to the short buff duration and requirement to shift out of bear form to gain the benefit, and since Guardians have so many other good endurance options, it gets a bit left behind. That leaves us with the Potency Conduits, of which Guardians have some okay options. Unchecked Aggression tends to be the default for Mythic Plus, which grants a little over 20% haste during Berserk, giving the cooldown a decent throughput increase, which gets even better when using Incarnation to double its duration. The other general potency conduit for bears is Savage Combatant, which causes Mangle to increase the damage of Maul, but again, as I mentioned earlier, Maul is a button you almost never want to press, making this conduit quite weak for dungeons. When it comes to Covenant-specific potency conduits, they can be hit and miss. Deep Allegiance for Kyrians is actually quite bad, often resulting in you desyncing Kindred Spirits from your target's cooldowns. The Necrolord's Evolved Swarm is alright, providing a decent boost to single target damage and self-healing. However, in Mythic Plus, this single target damage tends to be less of a priority, and as you'll see, you actually don't get a potency choice for your strongest Soulbind since it can't compete with the strong endurance conduits. Night Fae characters have Conflux of Elements, which increases your damage and healing during Invoke, which can be a nice boost when using it in caster form for a pseudo healing cooldown, or in Boomkin form for some additional damage. Lastly is Venthyr's Endless Thirst, which causes it to also increase your crit for each stack, giving a solid overall throughput boost, but in general this still tends to be beaten out by the flat haste buff provided by Unchecked Aggression. With conduits looked at, let's take a look at the top soulbinds for each covenant, starting with Kyrians, who will likely turn to Pelagos thanks to Combat Meditation's big mastery buff lining up with Kindred Spirits, and more importantly allowing Guardians to get 3 endurance conduits and 1 potency slot. As mentioned in the previous section, the Kyrian potency is quite bad, so this lets you have access to the only good Mythic Plus potency for Guardians and Unchecked Aggression, as well as 3 of the powerful endurance conduits which give bears a significant survivability boost. When it comes to Necrolords, Bones with Airmere is the favorite, as she again grants access to 3 endurance conduits, though instead of a potency she offers a finesse slot. This loss is made up for by several strong traits, including a flat 3% increase to your agility and armor at all times, Serrated Spaulders, which deals between 4 and 5% of your overall damage on average, and Marrowed Gemstone, which is an 18% crit buff that lasts for 10 seconds on a 60-second cooldown, giving it a decent overall uptime. The pseudo-cheat death she provides isn't terrible either, as it can give your group some time to kite away when you get killed. For the Night Fae, Naya is the strongest choice for general use, as she also has a couple powerful traits with Grove Invigoration granting a stacking mastery and percent health buff over time, and when using Convoke, attaching a nice 30-second defensive buff to it. Naya's burrs are also quite strong, dealing a decent chunk of damage overall, similar to Bonesmith's rated Spalders. You can also choose to pick up 2 or 3 endurance conduits depending on personal preference, opting to take a potency first instead to gain either conflux of the elements for stronger boomkin and caster convokes, or unchecked aggression for stronger berserks. Last up, we have the Venthyr, where Draven shines as their best soulbind, being another where you can pick up 3 endurance conduits as well as one of the best defensive traits in the game in Service and Stone, which reduces your damage taken below 40% HP by 10%, giving you a damage reduction when you need it the most. He also attaches a 10% 10-second long crit buff to your interrupt, which is something you should be using quite often in Mythic Plus, giving it a decent overall uptime. With all that said, I think Guardians is in a pretty good spot at the moment for Mythic Plus keys. Not as strong as the powerhouse that is Vengeance, of course, but I actually think they might be the second best tank for higher keys in Shadowlands Season 1. They have some interesting legendary and talent choices, combined with some very strong endurance conduits and the flexibility to play as any covenant to fill out what your group needs. They're also extremely durable, put out solid overall damage, and bring an insane amount of utility, which is great in 5-man content. Overall, I'm very happy with where Guardians stand as of now, and will definitely be playing one for the rest of Season 1. But that is it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please make sure you like and subscribe for more content like it. If you're interested in more Mythic Plus stuff, I have a video going over simple prideful routes for all 8 Shadowlands dungeons, which you can find on my channel or linked in the description below. I will also be putting out walkthroughs of every dungeon on plus 15 to give you all some more specific tips and hopefully help you achieve Keystone Master in Season 1. If you want to watch me push keys or just come say hi and ask some questions about Guardian Druids, feel free to stop by my Twitch channel or follow me on Twitter, both at Tactics. Thanks everyone so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.